It's Friday, and that means it's time for Football Friday. I'm Jenny Carlson here in the Oklahoman newsroom with our college football coverage team, joined by Barry Trammell, columnist, OSU beat writer Kyle Fredrickson, and joining us remotely from who knows where. I'm guessing home, maybe?
Yes.
All right, Ryan Aber.
Yes, more Oklahoma.
There you go. Ryan Aber, OU beat writer, joins us from there. OU, the only of the two playing this weekend. They got K-State on Saturday. That's an 11 o'clock kick down in Norman. But I feel like we need to start with OSU, Kyle, because they're national champions. as we declared on the front page of the paper today, champions. 1945 Cowboys have retroactively been named the national champions by the American Football Coaches Association. And should we take this seriously? I mean, we had some fun with it in the paper, but is it worth taking seriously?
Well, my thought process, I think, kind of mirrors what happened yesterday. We all got the news release, and at first, we kind of just shook our heads. This is silly. What's the point of all of this? What is the American Football Coaches Association thinking? What's the point of honoring a champion, 70 years after the fact? But as the day went on and we really started to learn about this 45 team, I think it is pretty special. It allows us to sort of really tell young fans about one of the greatest teams in OSU history, what they did, the types of players. Bob Fenimore, sort of a re-education of kind of today's youth on who this guy was and the type of football played back then. So at the end of the day, this is something OSU is going to take pride in for now and forever. They're going to say, hey, we were national champions in football. Whether or not that's the true case and whether they're not deserving of that honor, that gives us something fun to debate about. So at the end of the day, I do think it's a pretty cool deal.
What about it, Barry? Is taking this seriously?
Well, to the extent that we've ever taken any polls and national titles before, a few years ago, seriously, I would say this. This is just the natural progression of the coaches poll. We remember it as the coaches poll recent years. In the old days, we called it the UPI poll. But the coaches didn't get into the business until 49. There was some legitimate college football played before 49. Sure. So, if the coaches want to go back and make a retroactive national title, I think that's fine. The question I have is, what did Army do to hack you off? One of the greatest teams of all time was the 45 Cadets. A bunch of people went to West Point in those days, and Army just was a madhouse of great football. Doc Blanchard, Glenn Davis, Mr. Inside, Mr. Outside. Some people literally have said the 45 Army team is one of the greatest teams of all time.
And they gave up 46 points all season, that Army team did. So their defense was pretty dang good, too.
Well, so I don't know what the coach's criteria was, but spread a little love around.
Maybe Army didn't pay their dues to the American Football Coaches Association. I don't know. But I think that does beg the question. I mean, that Army team, obviously, pretty good. But, here we have, an OSU team also undefeated. Bob Fenimore, one of the greatest football players of that era, of probably any era, frankly. Is there an argument to be made, Kyle, that maybe OSU, would have been interesting to see how they would have fared against that Army team?
I think so. It's hard to argue against Army's resume. Ryan mentioned the defensive prowess. They beat two number 2 ranked teams during the regular season. Actually, I think the last game was against Navy in what would be their bowl game. So
they weren't scheduling non-conference.
No, there were no
like
cupcakes on the Navy 45 schedule. But you're right. This is still a chance for us to celebrate this 45 team. Bob Fenimore led the nation in rushing and total yards that year. The defense did only allow less than 9 points a game, so it's not quite the average that Army put up. Because it was so long ago and the game has changed so much, for modern day coaches to sit here and say, oh, these guys were better than this guy based on grainy camera footage and one lens that follows an entire game, there's no scientific way to prove this. There's always going to be some objectivity. So, I don't know if we'll have to reach out to some of these Army people to see if they're a little peeved by the news, but I even saw some pictures on Twitter. There is a coach's trophy in Stillwater, the real deal, 45. So
everybody out.
It's a hard not for people in Stillwater to be excited these days.
Now, I'll say this. OSU would not be they wouldn't be the worst candidate that the coaches have ever proclaimed national champions.
True.
I mean, the coaches have been screwing this up for years. I don't know why OSU shouldn't get some bounty from this.
Well, and I think what you said earlier, Barry, is the thing that rings true to me. And I was doing our Power Lunch live chat right before we came on the air, and that question was sort of asked about, the legitimacy of this whole thing, and I don't know how this whole process went down, but we have, for decades and decades, college football has been awarding championships in the goofiest ways possible. It was humans, it was polls, it was secretive polls, it was computer programs that nobody knew what in the heck was going on. I still don't think we've emerged from the not so perfect ways. I mean, I think we're still kind of moving towards what I think would be best, an 8-team playoff, but at least we've made progress. But it's only been recent. Look how long this has been so goofy that we've been doing it this way. So I don't know if I agree with the championship, but it just kind of mirrors the way this whole thing has gone over all of these
It should
years.
be noted, if there was a 14 playoff in 45, based on the AP poll, A&M last team out, they were ranked 5th. So
Ooh. Interesting, Kyle.
more drama to dissect.
Wow. All right. It goes on. We'll continue to follow this story because I think there will be some stuff done up at OSU to celebrate, and the trophy will be there. OSU has apparently found one of the members of the 45 team, so we'll continue to follow this as it progresses. I don't think there's plans for any parade, but ticker tape, I don't know. We'll have to see. Rings? Who gets the rings? I don't know. Anyway, let's talk about OU because they are the team on the field this Saturday. OSU coming to town. Ryan, let's talk about K-State for a second because most Big 12 teams really aren't that great at defending the run, but Kansas State is one of those teams that can do it pretty well. Is this going to be potentially the biggest challenge of the season for OU's run game and by extension its offensive line?
Yeah, I think there's little doubt about that. Oklahoma's offensive line, since Cody Ford went down, since Jonathan Alvarez went down with an injury and last week was just held out, they performed pretty dang well. I mean, we didn't expect those guys, Eric Wren, Ben Powers, to really put together the kind of performances that they've done the last couple of weeks. So I think this is their biggest challenge during the Big 12 season and also the biggest challenge for guys like Samaje Perine and Joe Mixon. Perine especially has been fantastic of late. He needs another really solid game in this one for OU to be successful. But I'm really looking forward to see that challenge of K-State's front seven, who held Christian McCaffrey close to under 100 yards. He had a couple big runs late that stretched him over, but that's going to be the key matchup in this one.
Barry, is it safe to say that Bill Snyder's the last coach in the Big 12 holding out hope that you can actually play defense in the Big 12? Is he just that old school?
Well, Bill's not sitting there saying he has all the answers. The Sooners beat him 55-zip last year.
True.
So, Snyder knows what he's up against, and OU ran the ball really well that day. But Snyder does some things that helps his defense. He tries to control the clock. They play limited possessions. There's not 16, 17 offensive possessions in most Kansas State games. So he does some things. He runs the ball himself well. So, it's about the most unorthodox team you can play in the Big 12. So it's a game where the Sooners, it's not going to be like playing Texas. It's not going to be like playing Tech next week. It's going to be different than that. And the Sooners have had their troubles. Lost 2 in a row at Owen Field to Kansas State. But it was 55-0 last season. Sooners do have the talent edge. If K-State stuffs the run, they still got Baker Mayfield to run around and deliver the ball, a new star in D.D. Westbrook.
Right.
I like the OU chances to score fairly well.
Yeah, you mentioned unorthodox, and I don't want to sound too much like a trumpet for stories coming up, but unorthodox is Bill Snyder and his staff. And you've got something coming up in our Saturday Sooner pregame that looks at just how sort of out of a time machine this staff is.
If you remember the old movie Space Cowboys with all the old astronauts, that's what K-State football is like. Bill Snyder has 5 guys on his staff that coached in the Big 8 conference.
Wow.
He's got 2 guys that were with him that first year. Bob Stoops was a young coach with Snyder in '89. 2 guys that were with him are with Snyder today. Dana
Prior
Dillon
to my birth,
and Del
I'll just
Miller.
throw that out.
Prior to your birth,
Yes.
yes, okay.
There was a time that K-State stunk. K-State stunk. But no, he's got a veteran staff. He's got a guy, Mo Lattimore, played at Kansas State in the 70s, started coaching at K-State in '76, which was 13 years before Bill Snyder. So this is a veteran staff. It's a staff that's seen it all. they still are able to get players lined up right and to play football the right way. So it's a fascinating thing going on at Kansas State University. OU's 1991 through 94 defensive coordinator, Tom Hayes, under Gary Gibbs, Bill Snyder's coordinator today, 22 years later. So we're talking about a bunch of old codgers that still know the game.
Well, and Ryan, Barry brings up a good point about the fact that a year ago, even with that experience on the K-State sideline, OU ran over them. That was obviously the week after the Texas loss, really unexpected Texas loss. OU had a huge travel delay, couldn't get out of Oklahoma, had plane issues, spent 8+ hours at the airport waiting on a plane to take them to Kansas, to Manhattan for that game. Got in very late, but really impressive against K-State. I'm sure they're looking for a similar performance, maybe without the travel delays. I don't think that'll be the problem this time around. But obviously offense was huge last year, really got rolling in that game in a way that we hadn't seen earlier in the season with the Sooners. As you think about where the Sooners are right now, who on offense do you point to as being most valuable, most important as they now point to this second half of the season and maybe starting out on a roll like they did against K-State last year?
Well, I think, to me, I've got to go with D.D. Westbrook. His performance since the bye week in the last two games has been game-changing. And I know Samaje Perine has been fantastic, and he's got Joe Mixon back there to help him. But D.D. Westbrook, to give them the ability to stretch the field, he was making a lot of catches those first 3 games of the season, but he wasn't breaking them for, 40, 50, 60 yards. And he's just been phenomenal the last 2 weeks. And I think when they've got that element that Sterling Shepard gave them the last couple of years, that offense is a completely different weapon than it was early in the season when they didn't have it.
What about it, Barry? If this Sooner offense is going to get moving like it did a year ago, does it come down to Mayfield? Does it come down to Perine, Mixon, Westbrook, Lincoln Riley, the offensive line? Do you have a top-of-the-list person that this falls on?
Well, I think if the offensive line can still play to the level it's played the last 2 weeks, everything's going to be fine. I still don't know that Westbrook's got a partner on the receiving end that can make a difference. That would help a bunch. But the truth is, the offense the last 2 weeks has played really well, and had turnover issues there against Texas and still put up big numbers. TCU, not a great defensive team, but a great defensive tradition. They got lit up by the Sooners. I think OU is going to score on virtually everybody they play. Ohio State's in the rearview mirror. The SEC, a possible SEC matchup in the bowl game is way down the road. Between here and there, I think the Sooners are going to score a bunch. The question for this team is not going to be on that side of the ball.
Well, we'll get to defense in a second, but let's revert back to OSU for a second because being off this week, Kyle gives us a chance to dive into some issues that maybe we've been seeing but haven't had a chance to get into really heavily. And one of the things that you're going to be looking at this weekend is fan attendance, something that I think all of us sitting at this table currently have made reference to in our coverage. The fact that OSU has been down overall with fans coming through the turnstiles. It's almost 3,000 on average that they're down. Season ticket sales, though, are fairly strong, sort of comparatively. You've had a chance to talk to a lot of people at OSU. They're aware of the problem, but do they have any thoughts about what's happening or what could be done to fix this?
Yeah, well, when they renovated the stadium and added all these extra seats, I think the main thinking was we have to sell tickets. We need to make this a viable business venture, and they've done that. With where they stand in season ticket sales this year, it ranks 4th all time. And considering this is a home schedule without OU, the premium game being a Texas team that's sort of on the rise right now, the schedule itself,
or on the fall, depending. Whatever.
I was going to say, well, you're going to get hopes up in Austin.
Well, listen, on the rise being they are starting from a low point,
well,
so
it's
sort of a backhanded compliment.
Okay.
But regardless, the schedule itself is not going to be one where fans see it and say, oh, I have to make these home games. If I'm going to go to Texas, I have to buy season tickets. Let's just do it. they've done that. In a business sense, they're successful. But like you mentioned, about 2,700 fans down per game on average compared to a year ago when the Cowboys hoped to break some attendance records and they failed to. It's sort of a combination of things that coaches and players have taken notice. Mike Gundy likes to think that the tailgate culture that OSU has established outside the stadium has a big reason to do with the number of fans leaving, because they can watch in the comfort of their tent with all their food and their satellite television.
Their adult beverages.
Yeah, their adult beverages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Cell phone reception works a lot better in those areas than in the stadium on game day. So with sort of this shifting in culture of who these sports fans are and the reasons they come to the game, I think this is kind of just the natural decline we've seen across college football with attendance. But it's caught everyone's attention in Stillwater, being that at a school like West Virginia, their attendance is up about 9% where it was last year. The Cowboys on the decline.
Yeah, Barry, you and I have both seen it. You notice that the fan base, as Kyle said, everybody's having struggles getting fans through the turnstiles, especially the students. That's been an issue for several years. The conferences, schools, they've devoted a lot of time and energy to try to figure out ways to get the students back in their seats. But at OSU, as much of a problem is after halftime. It's like people show up, it doesn't matter what's happening, weather's great, weather's bad, game's close, game's a blowout, people just disappear. I don't remember seeing anything like that before.
Well, it's definitely a trend. I saw it 2 weeks ago at TCU.
Okay.
Oklahoma TCU, a good solid game. A bunch of TCU fans primarily didn't come back. So this is sort of a phenomenon that I don't know that anybody realizes. What's going on at Stillwater is the Cowboys are catching up. They actually were ahead of the curve with student attendance. Their students did a great job with getting to the game, supporting the Cowboys. I think a lot of schools were envious of OSU's student participation. Now we're seeing that start to dip and fade, and OSU's going through what a lot of other schools are going through. So a lot of it is the electronics. If you go more than 10 minutes without your little trinket, your head explodes if you're a certain age. So schools are dealing with that. I know a lot of schools have rewired and made that part of the infrastructure, just enhanced cellular capability. So a lot of things going on here. What's interesting to me is that OSU's attendance generally has not been affected by who they're playing.
Yeah.
Pitt won't necessarily draw more than Southeastern Louisiana. It's crazy to me, but just a lot of things. And the truth is, this is across the board.
Yeah.
This is not even college. It goes to the pros. It goes everywhere. In the experience of watching sports at home or on television has become so high quality that it makes it tough to talk yourself into going or staying at the ballpark.
Kyle, OSU on the field under Mike Gundy has really been innovative. They, even off the field, I'll say, satellite camps, the use of the big poster boards. You had a big story about play calling last week. They've always sort of push the envelope. They've got a couple of graphic designers who've, how they do their social media has changed in the last year or so. They always sort of seem to be figuring things out and doing things in different ways. Is this going to be a case where they're going to be able to figure some things out, or do they feel as stonewalled as a lot of other schools do in all of this?
Well, it's sort of yet to be seen. Mm-hmm. The way Mike Gundy put it on Thursday when we talked to him is, we have a lot of really smart people in our department. We'll figure it out. Mm-hmm. Now, that's without actually offering a solution himself necessarily, which is probably how a lot of those people feel. They have a lot of things they can do to try to get participation up. Striping out the stadium is probably one reason, just to sort of get people talking about going to the game, being a big factor. But at the end of the day, it might be a college football program. Are these games, are college football problem?
Yeah.
Are these games too long? When we're talking about these 4.5 hour games, they're when you're going over an hour of what a typical NFL game will last oftentimes, you're just talking about shortened attention spans, and when you're at home, you can flip through the channels on commercial, flip through on halftime, as opposed to sitting and waiting around in the stadium. Yeah,
it's an interesting issue, and like you guys were talking, it's everywhere, so who knows, maybe what OSU figures out will be shared around. We'll see how it goes, but it's going to be interesting to see what you put together. Let's get back to OU for a second. I mentioned before, coming off what Barry had said about OU's defense. That's really what's going to determine how high OU goes, and I think it bears asking. We saw the changes and shifts in the secondary last week. A lot of it had to do with necessity. The Sooners had a bunch of guys hurt. Do you feel like, Barry, the Sooners have found something, or are you in more of a wait-and-see mode with the defense right now?
I'm wait-and-see mode. I will say this. The last 2 weeks, they've gotten lit up in spurts. They've also played excellent defense in spurts. With 4 minutes left in the second quarter the other day, it was 10-7, or OU scored to take a 14-10 lead. They'd played excellent defense. Then opened the third quarter, bang, bang, 2 long touchdown throws. And then the fourth quarter was sort of a disaster. Same at TCU. Second and third quarters, the 2 middle quarters, Oklahoma was dominant against the Frogs. Frogs didn't do anything. So they got to figure out why it's working in big chunks of time and then falls apart. And at least if you've done it some, you can do it again. So I'm reasonably optimistic that the Oklahoma defense will improve because you mentioned a lot of the young guys playing. They're only going to get better. But I still think it's going to be a work in progress.
Ryan, what about it? Do you feel like maybe these injuries forced, and I'm sort of thinking most about a guy like Will Sunderland, who, for all intents and purposes, we expected to not see much of, but then he comes out against Texas, plays pretty well. Do you feel like you've seen him sort of turn a corner with some of the question marks, or was that maybe just, I don't want to say luck, that's not what it was, but was that just a short sample size that's really hard to gauge from?
I think to me it looks like they've certainly turned a corner. They've found some things that work. Will Sunderland was really good last week. Chance Sylvie got turned around a little bit at times, but he was solid overall. Jordan Parker, those young guys look like they could be solutions down there. It remains to be seen whether that holds out over the stretch of this Big 12 play where they're going to get tested a lot more than even they were Saturday against Texas. I'm not sure this is the week to really find out about it, as Kansas State doesn't really stretch the field much. But I'm going to say cautiously optimistic. But I think what's made this defense work when it has is the ability for them to get pressure up front. And I think Obanya Okoronkwo is such a big part of that. When he's playing consistently, when he's disrupting, their defense is completely different, and that takes pressure away from whoever that cornerback is, the safeties, and the complete back end of the defense. And that's something that they have to maintain moving forward.
Ryan, I don't know if this is going to come to the fore this Saturday or anytime soon, but with all these injuries, I'm starting to wonder about just depth and how guys are going to be able to play, especially as they get into the deeper part of the schedule where you're talking about offenses that would like to have the OU defense out there for 80, 90 more plays a game. Does that become a concern, or do you just have to sort of set that aside and sort of see where things go with this OU defense? The injury thing, it was kind of freaky last week against Texas.
Yeah, to lose Khalil Houghton, your other safety who moves into safety when Stephen Parker shifts over to nickel when they need it, that was a big loss for them. And that's when they had to put Will Sunderland in the first time. Then they lose Ahmad Thomas to a knee to the head. And that's in addition to Will Johnson, Parrish Cobb, the guys that they already lost. And then Micaiah Quick goes out for 6 weeks with a knee injury. It was a crazy string of injuries over the last couple of weeks for the Sooners defense. But, like you said, they're not going to get tested as much this week. But looking down the road, depth has to be a concern. They've got to get Houghton back. They've got to get Parrish Cobb back. They've got to have guys that they can rotate in and out because, like you mentioned, these Big 12 teams like to run 90, 100 offensive plays a game, and you just can't stick with the same 11 guys. And also up front, it's going to be an issue. Charles Walker and Matt Diamond have shown some really good spurts. Charles Walker made the biggest play defensively in that TCU game. He's been out for a couple weeks. They need those guys back in order to hold up through the grind that is Big 12 defensive play.
Yeah, I think that's going to be something worth watching. Okay, guys, just a few minutes left in Football Friday. Let's do some picks. Kyle, let's start with you with OU. Across the board, everybody picked OU despite K-State's 2 wins in Norman the last 2 times they've been there. You had OU winning by a couple touchdowns. Why?
Well, I'll be in the stands on Saturday.
Wow.
The bye week, I decided to join up with some people. And
you can't get enough football.
I just can't get enough football. So the answer I'll give you is my presence will spark the Sooners to a 2-touchdown victory. But no, in all reality, just with what we've seen from Kansas State, with Jesse Ertz at quarterback, I don't know that they've put on the type of firepower, type performances to hang with this OU offense, and it seems like this is a game they can get back on track.
All right, Ryan, what about it? You've got, looks like a 3-touchdown victory for the Sooners. Give us your reasons.
Yeah, I went 42-21 OU. I think Oklahoma's offense is good enough that it's not going to be really slowed down by Kansas State's defense, as good as their front seven is. I think D.D. Westbrook and Mark Andrews make plays down the field, and Oklahoma is able to run the ball effectively enough to keep the Wildcats honest. And then on defense for OU, I think Kansas State is one of the few Big 12 teams that isn't equipped to take advantage of OU's defensive struggles. They're not going to go downfield a lot with Jesse Ertz. They just don't have the receivers. They don't feel comfortable enough with Ertz right now at quarterback to do that. So I think Oklahoma defensively can have a lot of success in this game and avoid those that bad fourth quarter that we've seen in the last couple weeks.
All right, Barry, you went even bigger. You went 45-20, and your answer is not because you had to pick an upset special. Why?
Wow.
Why the big point spread?
I just don't think Kansas State's. I think it's a bad matchup for K-State. As the Fieldhouse said, Jesse Ertz is not the kind of quarterback that can hurt Mike Stoops' defense. You got to throw on Oklahoma, I think, to beat them, and Kansas State can't throw that well. I think Oklahoma will not maybe dominate, but will control the game fairly easy. I say 45-20.
I went a little closer. Of all of us, I went the closest. I was 35-21 Sooners. Maybe I was a little too jaded by 2 K-State victories in Norman where, frankly, especially 2 years ago, Sooners were out of sorts. They just did not play well that day. I think K-State is so fundamental. They can expose you in ways that you're not necessarily expecting. I do think OU's the superior team. I do think they win, continue to build some momentum. But I think I like what you said. Control the game, but maybe still find themselves a little bit tighter fit than maybe some folks on the panel think today. Hey, be sure to stay with the best coverage team anywhere at newsok.com and every day in the Oklahoman. Thanks for joining us on Football Friday.